Hello, this is a Goodwill Cxunting podcast. Oh my goodness, right? 98 people listened to my podcast last week, and I actually can't cope with that. Like, I cannot believe that. I'm so grateful. I can't believe people listening to me just chatting absolute shite in my living room. But anyways, really appreciate it. Okay, a couple of things. Firstly, I don't know if you've seen the news this week that Spotify, the guy that runs Spotify, has sold loads of the shares and is invested the shares into drones. So I'm redirecting the upload feed. Whenever you have a podcast, you have a thing called an RSS feed, and that's the feed through which it gets uploaded to. It's like a URL, like a link that you can use to host your podcast on different sites. But I've been hosting it on Spotify, but I'm going to now redirect it to Acast. On Acast, if I get to 1,000 listeners as well, they will put adverts into the podcast, and then I can I don't know, I think I can get paid from the adverts or something, but the adverts aren't mine. Anyways, the point is, I'm trying to move away from Spotify because what an absolute cunt your man is. So at the start of the episode there, whenever I said this is Goodwill Cxunting podcast, part of me, there was a voice in my head, right, that was like, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are saying that? And it's funny because I've been speaking on TikTok this week about how Irish women need to be more materialistic, and not just materialistic in terms of buying things for themselves, but be more selfish is really what I should say, I suppose. Be more selfish, because for so long Irish women, last week's podcast was about the mother and baby homes, right? And the infrastructure of the state has wanted women to be quiet, to bow to the powers that be, but we've been doing it also within ourselves by dimming our light, and not to sound like some sort of American coach but we really have been dimming our light. We have been not looking out for ourselves, we have been not putting ourselves first, and we've also been demonizing women who do, and that is part of the patriarchy. The patriarchy wants us to hate ourselves because it benefits. And I'm not talking about, hate ourselves in a cosmetic sense or a physical sense. I just mean a spiritual sense, The patriarchy benefits whenever women are harsh on themselves and don't put themselves first. This podcast episode was inspired by a hater, nonetheless. They're always inspired by haters. See, to be honest, nothing fuels me in this world like spite. But this one was inspired by a particular hater who was a woman who was just really, she was trying to be mean this week, but you can't be mean to me because I am actually a narcissist. But she was talking about my appearance, and she was like, God, she didn't say you think you are someone, but she was hinting at it. And something I find really interesting about women who put their head above the parapet, in the sense of and I'm not even talking, I'm not acting as if I'm out here on the front lines or something. I just mean women who aren't afraid to speak in the public sphere. So that's people who make content, people who are out and about, activists, people who are artists, people who are creators, people who are just sharing their work. It's very often that we are made to feel like we should be embarrassed, and then people try and project that embarrassment onto us. And unfortunately, sometimes it works. I said in my last episode, I had a podcast in 2020 and 2021 called That Feminist Podcast. Now, I quit it for various reasons, mostly my book, but there was definitely a sense of embarrassment I got about being perceived this way. It's different because I'm using an alias, Goodwill Cxunting, but before it was my real name, and I was just I don't want to be perceived by anyone. And I think in Ireland in particular, because it's such a small country, because a lot of us grow up in small towns, even our cities are relatively small, the fear of being perceived is so intense. And safety, there's safety in numbers, there's safety in being part of the herd. Is that it? Yeah. And Ireland has been for so long a very hostile environment for women, and so blending in with the crowd has been a safety net. It's been a measure to make sure that you are going by as unnoticed as possible. Keep your head down, don't think you are someone, and hope that as a result you won't be, banished, whether that's physically banished to mother and baby homes or Magdalene laundries, or, just spiritually or metaphorically banished from your community and your loved ones. And before my account got banned, it's now reinstated by the way, which is crazy, but before my account got banned, I did a video called She Thinks She Is Someone, Weaponized Shame in Ireland, and I spoke about the book Milkman. I don't know if anyone's read it, by Anna Burns. Oh my goodness, that book like changed my life. And it changed my life because I read that book, and it's written in the kind of interior monologue of a girl from Belfast, West Belfast in particular, and none of the characters have names. They're just called like who they are in relation to the girl. So it's like, you know, brother-in-law, second brother-in-law, sister. And it changed my life because I was like, hold on a wee second, people want to hear stories from West Belfast? Like what? Like it blew my mind. And like that coming out at the same time as Dairy Girls, obviously now Kneecap are like the biggest rock stars in the world, but like realising that people care about our stories is crazy. But in particular, Milkman, you know, it's a brilliant book, like it won the Man Booker Prize and everything. But something in it that really struck me was there's this line, right, where she says that her sister married the wrong man. And I'm massively paraphrasing. I don't want to go and find the book and find the exact line because it's like a novel, you know, I can't, there's like no index I can find it. I'd have to literally manually go through the book. But it's something like the sister married the wrong man because it's safer to start with failure. Like failure is so common for particularly women in Ireland, and I don't mean failure like you are a failure. I mean failure as a sense of not trying, failure as a place of accepting the status quo and not trying to do anything different. And yeah, this line where the character, hold on, let's see if I can find it. Oh, I thought that was the case. This is one of those books, right, which every time I go to the charity shop I buy it because I'm constantly giving it away. And I gave it my copy that I'd annotated. I can't even speak. The copy that I like had written on and highlighted, I gave to my dad. So this copy doesn't have it. But yeah, anyways, the idea is basically that this sister was like in love with someone else, but chose the guy that she knew what life would be like with them, right? Because failure is safer. And it's also, I don't know if anyone's seen the film Banshees of Inisherin, but the same idea is in that. And it's a very inherently Irish mentality, I think. But Brendan Gleeson's character in that, sorry if anybody's not seen it and plans to watch it, so this is a spoiler, but Brendan Gleeson's character in that, you know, he's like a brilliant musician and he cuts off his own fingers. And like you can read in there's layers of metaphor for that, but something that struck me was this kind of idea that it's better to give up before you try, because we are so conditioned in Ireland to failure as the norm. If you heard someone screaming there, I've just closed my window. There's like a playground outside my window, which makes for crazy meetings. But yeah, we are so conditioned to accepting the bare minimum, and I don't even mean that like in the terminology what the bare minimum means today, you know, with relationships and stuff. It's just that we in Ireland have for so long had so little that having something feels like a lot, and it's better to just be grateful for the something than to try and have a lot because you're not going to get it. And that's definitely like the mentality that I grew up with and grew up around. And I really want Irish women in particular to feel worthy of more, because Irish women, and like I know I'm banging on about Irish women on my TikToks and stuff, but like we are so freaking unique, guys. We are so unique. See, when I go around the world, when I go out of the UK, obviously I was born in the UK, right? But when I go out of the UK and out of Ireland, people treat me like a goddess, and I'm not just saying that. When I was in New York, I felt like a full-on celebrity. I would go to bars, go to restaurants. People would pay for things for me. I'd go and order a coffee and people would be like, wow, your accent is so amazing. And like, it wasn't even just about my accent. It's just like being an Irish woman, people see you as this sort of like Queen Maeve, like Enya, like mysterious, ethereal goddess energy. Especially if, you know, you're a bit like quirky looking, you know, like I love to wear like big long floaty dresses and loads of jewellery and shit like that. And people really do treat you as you should be treated, but as we aren't in Ireland. And I am so passionate that Irish women feel entitled to, I'm not saying this in a corny way, but to take up space, to just be themselves and be themselves freely without feeling that like they have to dim their light. Because there's not a single Irish woman I know, hand on my heart, there's not a single Irish woman I know that does not have something interesting to say, whether it's their life experience, whether it's their hobbies, whether it's their interests, whether it's their crack, whether it's their wit. There is something that every single Irish woman I know can give to the world and can make the world a better place. So now for some stats. Like I said, this podcast was inspired by a hater who called me materialistic because I mentioned that I have a Mulberry handbag which I got for 25 quid from a St Vincent de Paul charity shop, and they were like, materialistic much? And I was like, yeah, you know what, I am materialistic, and that's fine. And I was talking about like going shopping with my nanny and going shopping with my mum, and I went shopping with my nanny to the original factory shop. I don't know if anybody who's from the Republic knows it, but I don't even know if they have it down there. But it's this like outlet, you know, it's like the outlet of outlet shops, you know. And my nanny was buying these trousers, and they were £12 for a pair of trousers, and she was like, she bought one, and then she was like, oh, I think I might get that other colour. And like, she was really unsure if this was okay to do, and she was like, oh, I'm going crazy today. And it's like, you know, it was 24 quid for 2 pairs of trousers. And you know, my nanny's okay for money now, you know. She obviously wasn't when she had her kids and she was, I was going to say grown up, but you know, in her 30s, 40s, probably into her 50s as well, money was very, very tight for her. But it's okay now, and it just broke my heart to see her like policing herself and policing her spending. You know, she's well into her 80s, and I'm thinking to myself, like, God, if I make it to my 80s, you best believe I'm going to be dripping in diamonds and furs and everything else. And yeah, I just think that we should be more selfish and materialistic. But to give some context to this rant, pre-1973, married women lost their public sector jobs, which is like working in the bank, working for the civil service, due to the marriage bar in Ireland. Now, that was only removed in July 1973. So if you wanted to have a career in public sector and you got married, you had to forfeit your career. Women could not open bank accounts or get credit cards without a male guarantor, which had to be usually their husband or their father. And again, that was well into the 70s, which is nuts. Like, think about that. That's crazy. 1973. A lot of our parents would have been born then. I'm in my 30s. My parents were born then. And women couldn't have their own bank account until 1974, when it became illegal to deny women a bank account without a male co-signer. And obviously this also meant that women weren't able to get mortgages. Okay, they weren't able to own their own homes. It also wasn't until 1908 that Catholic women could fully access higher education in Ireland. So even though they were able to access for higher education, if they, for example, wanted to train to be a nurse or a doctor, because of the marriage bar, which was in place to 1974, they could go and get this education, and then as soon as they got married, which, let's face it, a lot of women didn't have a choice in whether they got married and who they were getting married to. Until 1974, that education meant nothing, because the marriage bar came in and they couldn't work and be married. So truly, like, I know I keep saying it, but truly, we are the first generation, millennial women are the first generation in Ireland to really, really, really be free of all of these restraints that were placed on women. Even for millennial women, Irish women still earn approximately 9 to 12% less an hour than men. And that only gets worse when you get to high paid sectors like finance, tech, real estate and insurance and things like that. It can go up to as much as 24% in those sectors. So to match a man's retirement wealth, women would need to work for 8 years more. 8 years more of their life in order to match what a man will have upon retirement. And obviously we know the reasons for that. You know, women are more likely to give up their careers whenever they have children and things like that. But it's just crazy when you think about those stats, right? And then you think about the fact that, like, my nanny, for example, is fretting and, you know, damning herself over buying a £12 pair of trousers. And it's like, she, you know, I mean, I've spoken before about her work history, but, you know, she worked 3 jobs at one point. And she started working in shirt factories at like 14, 15. So, like, her working life was non-stop up until, her 50s. And she is, you know, now well into her 80s and is, you know, still thinking that it is bad or shameful to be spending your money on yourself. And you know, throughout that, like I say, she had 3 children. She also cared for my granddad when he had dementia until he went into a home. So it's like, she didn't really get to take her foot off the gas in terms of work until she was 80. And yet, the mindset that she has is that spending money on yourself is not okay. Like I say, this isn't just about money, although I love money and I'm very passionate about women getting money. But it's not just about money, you know, you can look at it in time as well. Spending time on yourself, having time to do things. And I know that that's not always so easy if people have children and things like that. But, you know, I have all the time in the world to myself, and people sometimes will like DM me or message me and stuff, and they'll be like, sometimes they'll say, how do you get confident? Or like, how do you, you know, come up with all these notions, all these things? But it's like, I don't have kids, right? I also don't have a partner, so my time is entirely my own, to the point that like, I can be bored. Like, boredom can come up sometimes, which is good, by the way, I think, because, you know, my creaky chair, we often don't get bored these days. But there are days where I'm like, like, I'm just looking around my flat and I'm like, what will I do? Now, I do live in London, so like, sometimes I'll just get dressed up and go for a walk around London. But like, to be able to be bored, to have the luxury of boredom at 32 years of age as a woman is so rare, definitely for the women in my bloodline. And I think as well, there is definitely a stigma attached to women that can come from other women as well. Like my comment said, materialistic much, but there's a stigma that can come from other women when you are a woman that puts yourself first. And like, it doesn't even need to be like what, you know, the extreme of my case, which is like living alone, you know, being single and things like that, traveling the world alone. It's like, even just women, you know, I've heard women shun other women because, for example, a mum has went away from the kids for 3 days to a hen do of her friend, you know. And I just really, really want to like get it out there to women that putting yourself first, even on the micro scale, even if it's like going and having a bath for an hour, it's part of patriarchy to make women feel like that is something to be feeling bad for and ashamed of. I just spoke there about go solo traveling, right? And really quickly, I want to say, because someone left a comment saying like talk about going solo traveling. So I've travelled a lot of places on my own. I went around India on my own. I moved to Ghana, although that was like part of a group thing, but I did move to Ghana on my own in the sense I didn't know anyone there, and lived there for 3 months. I moved to New York on my own, and I regularly go to Morocco. Well, I haven't actually been to Morocco this year. I used to go like 4 times a year. I haven't been as much this year because, yeah, I came back from New York, and New York is expensive, let me tell you. Do you know I once paid $3.79 for one lake? For one lake, anyways. So yeah, I travelled all over. I travelled around Europe a lot by myself as well. And someone asked, like, just to speak about it a wee bit, and also just like tips or like how to feel safe and stuff like that. So I do think, and like, I'm not trying to always talk about my height, but I do think I have a very different experience from a lot of women because I am so tall, because a lot of men don't bother me. And I say this because I've seen how my friends are treated who are much smaller than me and therefore perceived as being more vulnerable. For example, when I went to India, a girl that I met there and travelled around with a bit, you know, she was short and blonde, and her experience was very different to mine. However, whenever I do go solo travelling, I think a big part of it is like going somewhere that you know you're going to be comfortable. So I'm trying to think, when was the first time the first time I went on like a full-on solo trip was to London, actually, from uni. Like, I was in Leeds and I came down to London like for the weekend, and that was the first time I went on like a full-on, you know, solo trip. I stayed in a hostel. God, it was such a, you know, actually this week on Monday, today's Friday, on Monday, I walked past that hostel, and I have a very what's the word, like, I can remember things really, really, really well, which helps for writing books. But I can remember things really well, and I have a very clear memory of walking past people and looking into their window, and they were sitting, you know, in their living room, like watching the TV. And I remember when I was on this trip thinking to myself, how the hell have they managed to afford to live in London? Like, what do they do? And I remember being like, I'm going to find out how to move to London, and now I'm here. But yeah, I went somewhere that I knew. So I'd been to London loads with like boyfriends, with parents and stuff. So the first trip that I did, I came to see the play of 1984. 1984 is one of my favourite books, but the play was dog shit. But I came to see that because I was like, right, I know London, you know. So going somewhere that you know is a great first step. And even if that is like, and I know it might sound silly, but like if you're at home, for example, going to Dublin for the day or a night, or going to, you know, somewhere up the north coast or something like that, something that you know what you're doing is a good way to kind of get yourself adjusted to being by yourself, because being by yourself traveling is a bit of an odd experience at first. Now I'm so addicted to it that like if I go on holiday with people, it kind of annoys me, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, going somewhere that you know and feel comfortable in, and then branching it out from there. So after that, I went to like Barcelona, which I'd been to loads before, and now, like I say, I just go like all over the place. Another thing that the person asked me was how to make friends. So I know it's probably not too glamorous if you're in your 30s, but I do think staying at hostels is the best thing. You can get private rooms in hostels, you don't have to do a shared room. But staying in hostels is great because you are meeting loads of other solo female travellers. Like I actually, and I know people don't like using the word female, but it's just like, I don't know, like that's what they call the hostels usually, you know, it's female travellers. But I actually have stayed in quite a few hostels that are like female only hostels, and they are class. Also, they're so much cleaner and so much nicer than hostels with men. But yeah, travelling to using hostels I think is great, and going down to like the main room, you do have to put yourself out of your comfort zone, but you also have to remember that everybody else is in the same boat. Like I went to Berlin one time by myself, and honestly one of the best holidays I ever had. I stayed in the hostel, and like there was like, you know, like they always had like a big common room, and I went down to the common room, and like it was so funny because I was sitting talking to this girl from London who was like dead posh, and I was sort of thinking, oh god, I hope I don't get stuck with her all night, you know, just because it wasn't really my crack. And then these two Scottish fellas walked in, and they just announced to the room, right, is anyone going clubbing? And I was like, yes, let's go. But like going to the common room is so important whenever you are traveling, if you're going to hostels. If you're not going to hostels, there are apps where you can meet solo female travellers, like Bumble BFF you can use. Bumble BFF is really good. Another one that I've just remembered is Couchsurfing. So Couchsurfing is a little bit risky, obviously. Have discernment. But I did Couchsurf a couple of times when I was younger, which is basically like women will obviously only stay with a woman, but they will post their home on the internet, and you can stay like on their sofa for free. And I did that in London, and oh my god, I did that in London one time, and I ended up going to this like salsa night in this like underground club, which obviously, you know, if you like don't really know London very well, doing something like that is cool as fuck. And I ended up going to this like, yeah, like salsa night, and like coming back at like 3 o'clock, and I stayed with this girl who was just like so cool. And you know what's kind of nice about like solo traveling as well is like you don't always have to exchange social media with people. You don't always have to keep it going. Like you do get that experience of it being in the moment and a one-time thing. Also, it depends on where you go in the world, but you know, for example, I go to Essaouira in Morocco all the time, and there are places there. This might be a bit problematic because obviously it's like a bunch of Westerners congregating together, but there's like certain places I go there, like restaurants and bars and stuff like that, where loads of other solo travelers congregate, and so you can meet people that way as well. Also, and I know this is like maybe a bit of a stretch and a bit random, but like genuinely on Hinge, if you're in random places where people don't usually like, you know, if you're in a random place where people are traveling that is not super touristy, for example Essaouira, if you are on Hinge and you switch your settings to women, there are often women who are just looking for people who are like solo travelling. And I've used that before when I went to, where was it? Somewhere in Portugal. Like outside Lisbon, I can't remember what it's called now, but it was like a little surf town. And I did that, and it was like people, you can, and then you just put on your profile like looking for friends, and like you can literally just like go and meet people and like go for drinks and stuff. One thing I would say is really important if you're solo female travelling is do not get drunk. And like obviously it's totally up to you if you want to do that or not, although I did just say don't do it. But I just think for your own safety, it's best not to get drunk with people that you don't know or trust. And even like I love a drink, like honestly I'm not like an aggressive drinker now, but through my 20s, yeah. And like even now, you know, if I was going out with my friends for a night out, I would be a couple of bottles of wine at least. But when I go travelling by myself, I do not go over like 3 or 4 drinks just over the course of the whole night, like just because you really don't know who you're with, you know, and you do just want to make sure that you're getting back to your accommodation and things like that safely. But yeah, that is my roundup of tips for traveling by yourself. As with all things in life, the most important tool you can have for yourself as a woman is discernment. And when I say discernment, I just mean always analysing and being aware of your surroundings and people's intentions. To give you a really quick example, I was in a taxi one night coming back from the town in Morocco. Like, I stay in like a kind of resort thing outside the town often, and I was in a taxi coming back one night, and the guy took the taxi light off the roof, and as soon as the car stopped, I jumped out of the car. And like, this was on like the side of a road at night, but I just jumped out of the car. And he was like, no, he was trying to explain to me that he was taking the, and like, they speak French and Arabic there, not English, so I was like, I'm so sorry, like, I don't even know what you're saying. But he was trying to say that he was taking it off because of the wind. But like, I got out of the car and was like, no, like, I'm not getting back in that car. And he had to like really explain. He got his phone out and on Google Translate and stuff. And I sat in the front after that with the window the whole way down. So just wee things like that, having your wits about you. And that's why I think it's really important not to drink too much, but having your wits about you and just being really, really aware of your surroundings at all times. And also just remembering that it's much better to be rude than dead. And I know that's like a really bleak way to put it, but like, be rude. This just goes for general life. Be fucking rude. If you're scared or you think someone is going to act in a certain way, just assume that they are and be rude, because it's much better that someone just thinks you're a bitch than, you know, the alternative. That's a bit of a bleak note to end it on, but look, here we are, hard-hitting facts. So yeah, summary for this episode: be fucking selfish, be fucking materialistic, and be rude. Yeah, I feel like that's a good mantra to live by. Thank you so much if you've listened so far. Have a gorgeous week. Stay safe. Bye.